What if the smallest voice carried the weight of the biggest dreams? What if a child, too young to understand the size of the world, could move it with nothing more than a single note? Far away from the bright lights of a global stage, in the heart of the Philippines, lived a boy named Eli Mendoza. He was only 10 years old, yet life had already taught him the weight of silence, the depth of longing, and the hidden strength of hope. His world was simple narrow streets, the scent of fried food from corner stalls, and the endless hum of jeepneys rattling by. Yet in the middle of that ordinary chaos, Eli carried something extraordinary, a voice that could pierce through even the darkest nights. He lived with his mother, Maria, a woman whose hands were calloused from selling fruit at the local market. She had known loss too early, carrying the burden of raising her son alone. But in her eyes, Eli was more than a child. He was her reason to keep walking, her melody in a life of struggle. Every night, when exhaustion should have taken her, Maria would sit quietly outside their small home, listening to her son sing. Those songs were not just music, they were promises, whispers of a future brighter than their present. But dreams, especially for those born with little, often feel too fragile. The world does not always listen to the poor, to the young, or to the forgotten, and yet, Eli sang anyway. He sang with a heart too big for his tiny frame, with a voice that carried his mother's sacrifices, his father's absence, and his own innocent hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there would hear him. He did not know it yet, but his voice was preparing to travel farther than he could imagine. From the streets of his hometown to the grand stage of America's Got Talent, his journey was only beginning. The decision was never easy. For Maria, the thought of taking her only son across oceans, with barely enough money to cover the trip, was frightening. Yet, when she looked at Eli, his small frame, his eyes filled with innocent wonder, she knew she could not let his gift remain hidden. A voice like his did not belong to narrow streets and busy markets. It belonged somewhere vast, somewhere where the world could finally listen. The journey began long before they boarded a plane. It began with sacrifices, Maria working extra hours, skipping meals, and selling what little they had to save for the chance of a lifetime. Neighbors whispered that it was foolish, that dreams like these were for other people, not for children born into struggle. But Maria held on, believing that the world would one day understand the treasure her son carried within him. The first time Eli saw the towering buildings of America, his breath caught. Everything was bigger: the streets, the lights, even the sky seemed endless. For a boy who had only known the closed walls of a small neighborhood, it felt like stepping into another universe. His mother held his hand tightly, afraid of losing him in the crowd, but Eli's eyes never left the glowing billboards and endless faces around him. When the day of the audition arrived, the venue felt overwhelming. The stage stretched out like a giant waiting to swallow him whole. The lights, sharp and blinding, seemed to chase away every ounce of courage he had gathered. Behind the curtain, Eli's hands trembled. He was just a boy, barefoot only weeks ago, now standing in a place where dreams were tested, where voices either soared or were silenced forever. Maria knelt beside him, her quiet presence a shield against the noise. Though she said nothing, Eli felt her faith, stronger than any words. And as he stepped forward, his small shadow stretching across the stage floor, the audience grew still. They did not yet know his name, but something in the air whispered that they were about to witness a moment that would not be forgotten. The stage fell into silence, the judges sat waiting, the audience leaned forward, and the lights dimmed just enough to make the boy at the center look even smaller. Eli stood frozen for a moment, clutching the microphone with both hands, his chest rising and falling as if each breath weighed heavy with expectation. For a child who once sang only to the walls of a modest home, this silence felt both terrifying and holy. Then it began. A single note escaped his lips, fragile, uncertain, like a whisper carried by the wind. But as it lingered in the air, it grew, steadying itself, blooming into a sound so pure it felt unreal. The hall seemed to transform, the noise of the crowd melting into stillness as Eli's voice climbed higher, spilling emotion into every corner of the vast space. He sang not like a child, but like someone who had lived lifetimes. Each note carried weight, the ache of his mother's sacrifices, the echo of nights filled with hunger, the soft strength of dreams held too close to let go. His voice trembled at times, but it trembled with feeling, not with fear. It was as if his soul had been waiting for this very moment, pouring everything it had into the song. Eyes in the audience began to glisten. Strangers clasped their hands together, stunned by the innocence and power bound together in that small body. Some closed their eyes, letting his song wash over them like a prayer, while others simply stared, unable to believe what they were hearing. At the judges' table, something rare was unfolding. Simon Cowell, often the hardest to move, sat transfixed. His face softened, his eyes narrowing not in critique but in awe. It was as if each note Eli sang cracked something open inside him, something that years of shows and talent had never touched. When Eli reached his final note, the sound soared and then dissolved into silence, leaving a room full of people who knew they had witnessed something beyond talent, something eternal. The boy lowered the microphone, his small hands trembling, and for a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The silence that followed Eli's last note was unlike any other. It was heavy, sacred, as though the entire hall was afraid to breathe and disturb what had just happened. For a long second, the boy stood under the lights with his head bowed, his chest still trembling from the effort, his small frame dwarfed by the enormity of the stage. Then, all at once, the room erupted. The audience rose to their feet in a thunderous ovation, the sound of clapping and cheering crashing down like a wave. People wiped their tears as they shouted his name, though many had only just learned it. In that moment, Eli was no longer just a boy from a distant neighborhood. He was a voice that belonged to the world. At the judges' table, Simon Cowell remained still. His face was no longer the mask of stern judgment the world knew so well. His eyes, glistening, locked onto Eli as though he had seen something rare, something pure, that had pierced through the walls he carried around his heart. Slowly, Simon rose to his feet. The other judges looked at him, sensing what was about to happen, but the decision was already made. Simon lifted his hand and pressed the button. In an instant, golden light burst from above, showering the stage with a rain of glittering confetti. The crowd screamed louder, their voices echoing through the hall, as Eli froze in disbelief. His small hands reached out as though to catch the falling gold, his face lit with shock and wonder. Maria, watching from the sidelines, could no longer hold back her tears. Her son, her little boy who once sang to peeling walls and tired streets, was now standing beneath a storm of gold, his dream unfolding before the eyes of millions. She pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed by pride and relief, as though every sacrifice, every sleepless night, had led to this single, golden moment. And there, at the center of it all, Eli stood in awe, bathed in light, confetti clinging to his hair and shoulders, his eyes wide with a child's astonishment. Time seemed to stop, and for that breathless instant, the world saw not just talent, but hope itself standing on a stage. When the golden confetti finally settled, the stage lights dimmed, and the cheers faded into a steady hum, Eli stepped off the stage with his mother by his side. His small hand clutched hers tightly, grounding him in a world that suddenly felt too big, too bright. Behind him, the echoes of applause still lingered, but in his heart, all he felt was the quiet warmth of Maria's touch. Backstage, people rushed forward to congratulate him. Strangers who moments ago had never known his name now looked at him with awe. Yet Eli's eyes searched only for his mother. When he found her, she knelt down, her face streaked with tears but glowing with pride. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face against her shoulder. For them, this was more than a victory. It was a promise kept, a dream neither of them had let go of, even when the world said it was impossible. On the other side of the curtain, Simon sat alone for a brief moment, wiping at his eyes. It was rare for him to be moved so deeply, but Eli's voice had touched something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just talent, it was truth, the kind that cuts through all pretense and leaves only raw humanity behind. And in that truth, Simon found himself reminded of why the stage existed at all, Not for fame, not for spectacle, but for the moments when a single voice could remind the world of its own fragile beauty. News of Eli's performance spread quickly. Clips of his song traveled across the globe, reaching hearts far beyond the theater. In living rooms, in buses, in quiet corners of cities thousands of miles away, people listened to the voice of a boy who sang like he had carried the weight of 1,000 dreams. And in each listener, something stirred a reminder that greatness can rise from the most humble places, that hope can be born from hardship, and that even the smallest voices can echo louder than the world's noise. For Eli and Maria, the road ahead was uncertain, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had already proven something timeless, that love, sacrifice, and belief in a dream could turn the impossible into gold.